Okie dokie dokie do. Let's see. Is this working? Is this working? Is this working? It says live on Vimeo. Did the back door work? Unstable connection. Oh, that's not good. Come on, Vimeo. You're killing me here. Why are you having troubles? Let's refresh. We're refreshing to see if we're showing up anywhere. I don't think I'm happening. I can see you. How can you see me? I'm not live. Am I live right now? I'm not live. Go live. Okay. At least that'll pull me live one spot. Let's try. Let's bring up YouTube. Are we working? Are we working? Hello, world. The interwebs and computers have rebelled against me. I don't know if you guys can see this or not, but I'm trying. I'm trying. I am trying. Trying and trying and trying. Yeah, see, I'm not on YouTube right now. Nope, don't want to go in there. Don't want to go in there. Oh, crap. Come on. Well, on my computers, it's not working anywhere, even though I'm here. So thank you to our host site, Vimeo. Okay, this is I'm live on 1. Swell. So it says you guys can see me on 1 thing out of 4, which is not good. You know? Not working on YouTube. Bowie. You just never know, gang. I don't know what to tell you. My software isn't working. My backup software isn't working. There ain't nothing seems to be working. Vimeo, I think, is having some serious issues. Hello to the world. All right, so we're at least coming through on the community page. Nobody's watching it, so that's good. Yeah, you're all blowing me up saying, "Where are you?" I'm trying my family. I'm trying my CC family. So I've been trying for like the last, I don't know, like 45 minutes, been trying to figure out what's going on with my none of my software is working. You're on Facebook now. Hi, Mom. Thanks. My mom's here. That's cool. But YouTube's not working. And I don't think for some reason Vimeo's having some issues because it's only pushing through to certain things, which makes me think that it's a YouTube issue. So that's not good. Okay, I'm gonna give myself. Here's the deal. I'm gonna give myself like 3 more minutes, and then we move on. 3 more minutes to see if I can figure this out, and then we move on. The interwebs have rebelled against me. Oh, great. YouTube won't let me stream. That's funny. I can't even dual stream, guys. All right. I don't even know why I'm having issues. Don't even know I'm having issues. Don't even know I'm having issues. Hello for the 2 people out there. It's probably me and my mom. That's what it is. Let's see, y'all. All right. Hey, we're bumping up there. We got a couple more, you guys. Hey, guys. Thanks for tuning. Okay, do me a favor. If you guys can see me, write in the comments. Put your name. If you can see me, put your name in the comments. Put your name in the comments so that I know you can see me. Put your name in the comments so that I can know you can see me. I'll bring up my curriculum because it looks like I'm working on 1 out of 4 platforms, guys. That stinks, huh? Gosh, you put all this time and energy into this stuff, and then something like this, and kaputski. You know what I mean? Like kaputski. Put your name in the comments if you can see me, and tell me what you're watching on. I'm assuming you guys are all on the same platform. Okay, Hallie's there, John is there, Renee is here. Awesome. Okay, all right. You can see Joanne Hallie and Sailor. Hi, Sailor. Little baby Sailor's here. Coolio. All right, we're only rocking 1 out of 4 platform, guys, but okay. Like, I guess we're doing it. So, okay, 1-4. Ouch. Ouch. You know? Come on. What's up? For whatever reason, my software is totally not working, and my backup software is not working. How do you like that, guys? Yeah, I'm like that bad that I actually have a backup software. Oh, the Keppins are here. Hi, Keppins. Glad you guys are tuning in. That's fun. So I don't know what's up. I've never had these problems today. And then when I started getting ready, so I started getting ready earlier, and I started doing some prep stuff, and I knew something was off because one thing didn't work. And then ever since, we've been having trouble. Well, okay, enough of you guys are here. We should get on to some good stuff. Sure, souls are tuning into Facebook. Okay, so you guys are probably all on the same Facebook community page, huh? Sweet. All right, cool. Thanks for coming. Thanks for joining in. Sorry we're having troubles. I feel like every time we have troubles, but whatever. We do our best, right, guys? We do our best. Thanks for joining the stream tonight. Welcome to the C3 stream. I don't have any of my fancy stuff up. I don't have my intros. I don't have my cool little videos or none of that stuff because the software ain't working, but that's okay. We're moving on. Life happens. Makes me think of the Forrest Gump shirt. Can I talk about that on the stream? I probably shouldn't talk about that on the stream. But let's talk about something else. Okay. Let's talk about what we're going to do tonight, which is we are going to launch. Part of the reason why I was excited for tonight, I want to make sure that everything works for tonight, is because, see, that's why. Guys, I don't talk about spiritual warfare lightly or often, but maybe this is a spiritual warfare thing because tonight we're going to be starting something brand spanking new. We're going to start an 8-week series. Woo! 8 weeks. We're going to go 8 weeks where we travel through the entire Bible in 8 weeks. We're going to go through the whole thing in 8 weeks. Very broad, big picture, like themes and all that sort of stuff. We're going to be looking really big on it and just kind of broad. So, but it's going to help you tease out some of the big thematic, significant moments and ideas in the Bible. So if you've got a Bible, you want to bring it out, coolio. We are going to get into a bit of it tonight. I want to give you guys a heads up. If you are interested in traveling over these next couple weeks and you want to know more about where I'm getting my content, I have visuals. Ooh, I have visuals for us. So here's the dealio. I have physical, and then I'm going to try to share my screen because I'm not used to doing it this way. So you're not going to probably see a lot of, well, we'll see how it goes. You may not see a lot of me because I want to make sure you guys can see the actual content because I got good content to share with you. So here's the deal. We're going to do this class. We're going to do a class together. If you want to hang out with me over these next couple of weeks, here's what we're doing. We're doing this class called See Through the Scriptures. And if you're interested in finding out more about where I found these, which are the companion books, you can go to crossways.org. O-R-G. Crossways with an S.org. Crossways is a publishing, I don't know, they make a bunch of stuff. They make a bunch of classes, and they're all revolving around scripture. They come from a similar background to myself, and so theologically, they're kind of like in the same ballpark. They're pretty close. He's got a Lutheran background. The guy who writes it. He's from Australia, though. And so if you're interested, you can, and you really want to grow in your scripture, like if you're ready for homework and all that sort of stuff, you can buy what is called the student pack. And that's what I'm holding here. I'm holding the student pack. You can go to crossways.org, look for the class See Through the Scriptures. There's a bunch. Look for See Through the Scriptures, and you can find a student pack. Okay. So you can find a student pack if you're interested. You can order that. Otherwise, you can just hang out with me and track as best you can with you don't need it. You don't. I mean, we're going to be doing it regardless, but you don't need it. Okay. If you're looking for like, I want to dig into the scriptures and I want to learn this stuff for myself, not only with what Pastor Andrew's doing on Tuesday nights, but I want to help supplement the rest of the week. This is going to take you into like what we talked about in a further deeper level and a deeper detail. Okay. So if you want, crossways.org, see through the scriptures. Because that's what we're going to do. It's an 8-week class. So we're going to give it a whirl these next 8 weeks. Hopefully I'll figure out the rest of this. Hey, Kimberly is here. Hola. Can you guys hear my Google?
Home app.
My Google Home is talking to me. I didn't even say Google. Hola, good to have you. Tibbets are here. You're excited about this. Good. Yeah, you guys voted. So you guys picked this. This is what you guys asked for. So here we go. 8 weeks. We're doing this thing. See through the scriptures. Let me see if I can share my screen so you guys can see. I have visual aids all the way through. So let me see if I can do this right. Boom. Oh, cool. Oh, I can do this. There we go. We're going to do this. Can you guys can see this? Yes, you can. At least it's telling me you can, so that's cool. Nice. All right. Oh, Joe found us too. Hey, Joe. Sorry, man. We were having troubles with none of my stuff's not working. So I'm only on 1 out of 4 platforms right now. Thanks. I'm glad you were able to find it, though. I'm glad you were able to find it. So here's the deal. We're going to do see through the scriptures. You're not going to see a lot of me. Sorry. I was hoping to do this in a different way, but this is going to work for tonight. And then we'll get through onto, I'll do my best to figure it out for next week. Okay. See through the scriptures. Here, let's see how I'm going to do this. There we go. This is the course. It basically gives you an idea of the mission and the vision of what. So the Crossways is cool. Crossways International, their heart is for the people who produce this stuff. Their heart is for helping people understand biblical literacy, the living word. So that's Jesus. The living word is Jesus. And the written word is the Bible. So their hope is that by experiencing the Bible, you are going to experience the living word of Jesus Christ. And so they're really big on sharing and trying to better understand the biblical narratives. So they got a bunch of classes on there, and if this goes well, which is the hope, we're going to do more of their stuff in the future. We purchased this as a church, so we're legal. All right. How do you like that? Is that good? So here's the deal. I can see your comments by doing this this way. Okay, so I can see your comments. So if you guys have questions as we go along, you're not going to be able to see me. Again, I'm sorry, software having issues, but I can see you. I can see your comments. So as we go, you got questions, throw them out there, and I'll pause and try to do my best to address it. So this is an 8-week biblical survey. This is the 30,000 foot level. So if you've never opened a Bible before, this is fabulous for you. If you have read it forwards and backwards and studied intently, this is also good for you because this will refresh and help you reframe by teasing out big stuff. Here's the first thing. As we begin the journey, as we begin to see through the scriptures experience, we got to recognize how we locate ourselves within God's creation. You know, as we approach the Bible, there's some grounding that has to take place as we talk about it. So when we talk about and get at the scriptures and the biblical narrative, when we talk about the Bible, we have to remember that the Bible actually, the events of the Bible transpired, they occurred on in an actual fixed real place, location, and time. It's a fixed historical experience. The biblical narrative is trying to get at real people who really existed in a real cosmos. And you know, this is the image of a galaxy, the Milky Way, and then you can see our tiny little planet there, planet Earth with the arrow. And it's trying to just kind of frame for us how small our sense of the world can be and how vast the universe, and in pointing to the size and scope of the universe, it's trying to get us to recognize that the biblical narrative is really a cosmological narrative. Woo, 10-cent word there. Cosmological narrative. What I mean by that is the size and scope of the biblical narrative has to do with God, and God is really big. Okay. Now that said, even despite the size and scope of the divine reality and what we name as God, the person of God, the events of the Bible occurred within a historical context and an actual physical place, a location. So here's an image for you of the ancient world. This is a map. You can see there the thing you'll probably recognize in the top left part of it is Italy, Greece, and the Mediterranean Sea. So that kind of locates for you in that image. And you can see these are all historical locations and historical places that the Bible talks about. You can see in there, for example, Jerusalem. That's that white area. Israel is, so to speak, the white area, and Jerusalem is that star, and that star is the Star of David to locate where Jerusalem, the city, is to this very day. Okay, so that kind of orients you. And then you can see a bunch of other historical cities. And these are all really important cities. When you go into the Bible and you read the Bible, you'll see that these are named. Things like Babylon, Nineveh, Phoenicia, Damascus. I mean, these are all cities that are referred to in the biblical narrative. And this is to help us recognize and understand that when we read the Bible, this is not just simply a made up fairy tale. Okay. This is trying to capture the stories of people and their experiences with a divine, holy God, as they experienced him within their lives and where they lived. So as they try to capture their experiences in the accounts of how they interacted with the divine and what the divine did in relation to their lives and the broader scope of the world, they wrote a lot of those things down. Originally, it was all oral tradition. Okay, so the Bible was originally oral tradition. By that, I mean the stories have been passed down by word of mouth long before they were written down. And yet, over time, they were most certainly written down. I mean, that's what we got right now. We got the Bible, after all. The Bible can be broken up into a different. It can be broken up in a couple different ways, but most prominently, the best way to look at the Bible as we kind of begin to study it is to see the Bible as a collection of books. The word in Greek, biblio, from which we get Bible, literally means library. It's little library. So the Bible means little library because it's not just one book, but a bunch of books. And yet, those bunch of books intertwine in such a way as they create a cohesive whole. On that top shelf, you can see what I would describe as genres. You can see it says Hebrew scriptures. So the Old Testament and the Hebrew scriptures, so the top two shelves of books, are the same books. They're the same. They're ordered a little bit different, but they're actually the same books. The Hebrew scriptures, or the ones that the Jewish nation and the Jewish faith ascribe to, are the same as that you would find in the Christian Old Testament. They're just ordered a little bit different. In fact, I had one of you come up to me when we were in the building, one of the last times we were in the building, and said you were very excited because you had a Jewish Bible, which is marvelous and great and wonderful. What that means is you have an Old Testament. You've got the first part of the Bible. Christians ascribe to both the Old Testament, which has the Hebrew scriptures, as well as the New Testament. You can see the New Testament there on the bottom portion. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. That's one thing. Oh, you guys can see. Oh, all right. There you go. So on that bottom part, you can see kind of the genres in the New Testament. We generally break them up into three parts when it comes to the New Testament. You've got history, which are the Gospels, life, death, resurrection of Jesus Christ. They're historical accounts. Okay. Hey, Tommy Patnode is here. Hey, bud. Glad you're joining in. Thanks for tuning in, bud. So you've got the historical accounts of life, death, resurrection of Jesus. You'll notice there that Acts kind of is included in that. And for those of you who joined me on the last couple of weeks when we did a look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four Gospels, you learn that Luke is actually part 1 and Acts is part 2. They're written by the same author. And part 1, Luke, covers the life of Jesus. Part 2, the book of Acts, covers the life of the church, the beginning of the church. And so those are kind of considered the historical parts. Paul's letters, the guy was just a prolific writer. The Apostle Paul planted churches and then would write to the churches that he planted. When he moved on to plant the next church, he would write meaningful letters that we believe were divinely inspired. And they were eventually circulated by the wider church. And so you can see there, he has a ton of writings. He wrote a huge amount. That's all one guy. The bottom shelf yellow is all one dude. And then you have the green section, which is a bunch of other kind of random authors, a bunch of guys. A little bit more complicated when you talk about the Old Testament. Let's go back to the Old Testament briefly. I'm going to talk about it from what I would describe as the Christian perspective. Okay. The Christian perspective sees the major categories of history, poetry, major prophets, minor prophets. When we talk about history, we're talking about anything that kind of travels the story of the Jewish faith, right? So it's kind of tracking the Jewish history, if you will. Okay, that's why we describe it as history. Poetry. This is stuff. The most notable one that you guys may have heard of before is Psalms. Psalms is all poetry, but there's a couple other books that fall into that category. Job does as well. Surprise, surprise. Song of Solomon. That's poetry. That's actually erotic Egyptian love poetry. Ooh wee! Read that one on your anniversary. Ecclesiastes, totally different kind of feel to it. Proverbs, same thing. There's sayings, pithy sayings. You get the prophets. Now, when we use that term prophet, we're talking about somebody who is speaking for God. A prophet in the Bible itself is referred to as a holy man or a holy woman who is speaking truth and usually has a sense of future orientation. This happens in the secular world too. When we use that term prophet, we're talking somebody who can only like predict the future. It's something very different for that. Prophet means in the Christian faith, someone who can speak truth, prophetic, speak God's truth. Now, when they talk about the future, it happens because it's the truth. It's what God has said will happen. And so it does happen. And that's part of the reason why it gets that connotation of being able to predict the future. It's not so much that they're predicting the future as it is that they are sharing God's truth with people. And there are major ones and minor ones. The major ones, simply put, are long-winded. The minor ones, short and to the point. And there's a whole hodgepodge. Okay. So really it's three big categories: history, poetry, and prophets. And it's just the long-winded prophets and the minor prophets. Okay. And yes, I will admit I would fall into the major category. I'm long-winded. All right. All right. Again, if you dwell in the Hebrew context, if you dwell in the Hebrew context, they're just going to title a little bit different. So, all right. So here's an image for us. This all basically gets very complicated. When you think about life and you think about scripture and you think about faith, you can see there's a dude at the bottom who's like, how do I make sense of this Christian faith? How do I put all the puzzle pieces together? See the puzzle? You get it? It's a big puzzle. Because when we talk about the Christian life, there's so many facets, there's so many parts to it, and it can get really confusing. It can get overwhelming. You do have the Bible, but then you also have pastors. That's at top right with a little white collar there. If you ever go to tradition service, Pastor Bob and I wear white collars. That speaks to our office, the role that we have. We have, church touches and speaks to a whole variety, and the Christian faith speaks to a whole variety of pieces in our lives, like community. You can see a couple faces there. If our Christian faith speaks to what it means to gather in a physical location, or I suppose digital location would probably be a better way to say it right now. That's the image of the church there. Money has a role to play in generosity. We talk about generosity at Christ Church. You can see some tablets, the 10 Commandments, and even like a suggestion of an angel. That image in the bottom left is suggesting angel. And of course, in the centerpiece there, you got the skull and skull and crossbones. Well, you don't have any crossbones, but you got a skull. And the idea there, of course, is, the idea is death, that resurrection, but also death, judgment, sin, pain, hurt. Our faith has something to say about all this stuff. And when you as a Christian try to wrap your mind around all this stuff, well, basically you're going to spend your whole life trying to do that. And getting a biblical perspective will help edify us and kind of shape us as we understand each of these things. Okay. So that's what that's for. When God created, part of what we have to do is set a framework here too of understanding. Let me talk through a couple things on this image for you. The first is, as we begin the kind of the biblical journey, it's to understand that God is sovereign. It's a fancy word, that word sovereign. It's kind of old school. You guys know what it means pretty much, I'm sure. But Lord, Master, Creator, He is the ultimate power. And fortunately, He's the ultimate lover. He's the ultimate good and gracious God. So we have an image for God here that actually appears in this that we're going to use over the next 8 weeks. Anytime you use Crossways material, they have some similar symbols, images. I don't know what you want, icons maybe to lead us through the biblical narrative. And in this case, there's the image for God. It's this circle. Can you guys see the circle with some arrows going out of it? That's what the illustrator uses as representation for God. Okay, a circle with some arrows going on it. Why in the world? Like, if you had to draw God, what would you draw? Put in the comments, would you? What would you draw if you were tasked with drawing God? What would you draw? You know, like what if you were tasked, if someone gave you a pen and a blank sheet of paper, what do you would describe what you would draw? Would you draw a old I okay, like the first thing comes to my mind is old guy with big flowing hair, Gandalf, right? I mean, that's probably what I would do is Gandalf. You guys know what I mean? I would do Gandalf, I suppose. What would you draw? Um, it's kind of a difficult task to draw God. In this case, the author has tried to capture God by some meaningful and symbolic choices. So, first off, a circle. A circle has no beginning and it has no end. God has no beginning. God has no end. Yes, we are finite creatures. That blows our mind. We can't wrap ourselves around it, but it's also like part of the definition of God. No beginning, no end. There we go. Kimberly. Okay, so Kimberly, you hit this. Something with a blinding light, something bright and shiny. Yeah, well, so at its centerpiece there, you can actually see interior in the circle that it's white, right? You can see that there's a white, unbroken, and that's got to do with holiness and perfection. And when we use light and white and what that connotates for us, usually it's a positive as opposed to dark and black. But you notice there is a dark and black there as well, which is to say that there's a measure of judgment, that God is still judge and so forth. So he's an unbroken, all powerful, has no beginning, has no end, and yet notice the four arrows. Do you guys see the four arrows going out? In all directions, there's arrows going out. And that's because at his center, at his core, God's defining characteristic is love. Is love. That's one of our big claims as a Christian people that makes us bizarro and radical, to be honest, is that we believe the centerpiece of God's heart and character is love. And love puts other people first. Love is outward oriented. Love is asking the question of, how do I put this other person and their needs, the significance of their life before my own? And this is most perfectly embodied, of course, in the person of Jesus. And so the illustrator tries to capture for us a sense of God by drawing a perfect circle and arrows going out in love to others. Good one. Tom put in there a large hand holding a heart. See, you get this shaped earth. Yeah, that's good. That's good. I like that. That God, right? It makes me think of the song. He's got the whole world in his hands, right? Maybe that's what's going on in the back of your heart or head too. Is that image of like God holding the world, and that's actually what this is trying to convey. So you guys can, Tom, you nailed it. You can pick up on this that in the image here, you have basically the world and then a person in the bottom right. That's humanity, a representative of humanity, a person. And you can see that both the person and the earth are wrapped and tagged, and it says "My property, handle with care." And then in the bottom it says "My property, instrument of service, develop, care for, and use responsibly." And so the idea here is that God created Earth, He created humanity, and is sovereign over both. Okay, so that's what that's trying to capture. And then in creating everyone, here's another great image. This is why I like this material. It is good. I mean, it feels kind of funny to me because it I don't know. Once you get used to it, guys, you're gonna dig it because it works. You're gonna remember it. That's why it's nice. So here's an image where you have at the center, you've got a world that God created, and when God first created the world, we get this sense that He created the world in such a way, and humanity in such a way, is that there was perfection. The Bible would say it was very good. That humanity is meant to be in community, and so you have around the world kind of the kumbaya thing going on there. Everybody holding hands and singing Kumbaya, my Lord. Come on, break out in song with me. Kumbaya. You guys know what I'm talking about. Okay, so you got this sense of perfect harmony, though, right? I mean, that's what that image is capturing. That in the beginning, when God first created the world and created humanity, there was perfect harmony. And if you go to the top part of that image, you've got God, the image for God, and you have a crown representing and acknowledging his sovereignty. And then you can see two red arrows, the longer red arrows, both going to each person through a person and then also back to God. And what this means and what that's trying to signify is the way in which we relate to God. We men and women relate directly to God, and yet we also relate to each other. That's why the arrows go kind of like through the other person, so to speak. That God loves one another and loves people through people. And we say this at Christ Church regularly. God loves people through people. God heals people through people. God preaches to people through people. God cares for people through people. That's how God works. And that's why you have the image also of like the kneelers, the two individuals kneeling there. It's because they're in mutual service. And so when God created, he created the world in relationship with humanity, and with humanity in relationship with one another, aspiring to create the world in mutual service and love. And then you can see the two little tablets. They're in the kind of like the centerpiece, and the tablets usually for us convey like what 10 commandments. Like that's what comes to mind is 10 commandments, but that really is kind of a short-sighted. That's not really what we're trying to go for when we think 10 commandments. We're really trying to go for the idea of covenant relationship. All right, and we'll talk about covenant actually a little bit later, but the idea of a promise or a binding relationship. So God creates all this stuff in relationship. All right, here we go. This gets a little more specific. Now we're getting into the scriptures. That was all kind of like theological backdrop. Let's talk about Das Bible. So very soon after God creates the world and creates humanity, the animals, the earth, things go awry. All right. And this is where we get some of the more famous stories in the Christian narrative that you are probably familiar with. If you are not, they're in the very beginning. And they're significant because they help us try to interpret and understand why the world is so messy and why people are broken and messy. Why the world is broken and hurting in so many ways. In fact, you'll notice in the graphic there that the world is broken. If you show up for Sunday, or if you've heard me and Pastor Bob preach, you will hear us talk about sin as brokenness. And this image actually picks that up beautifully. That sin is the brokenness of relationship. It is the brokenness of God's intended order. It is the brokenness that happens in our lives and around us. And it's got big ripple effects when, I mean, you guys know this, when you do something or when you experience, sometimes it's not even just, sometimes people limit the idea of sin to an action, and it's far more than that. Sin is much bigger than that. Okay, sin is inherent brokenness that you and I carry around with us and have to deal with. And the way that the illustrator tries to capture the sense of sin and capture, oh man, how would you say this? The way the illustrator tries to capture the essence of sin is by that circle that goes back in on itself. Do you guys see that? This is like a lightning bolt here. There's like a white lightning bolt that is striking the center of the earth and shattering it. And the issue inside that lightning bolt, you see this circle that is curved back in on itself. And that's trying to the concept there is sin. Okay. So in the same way that the illustrator was trying to capture God, he captures sin by this inward curving circle. It's actually, man, after all the different stuff that I've seen and all the different stuff that I've read and studied and all this sort of, this is like my go-to when I try to describe sin to someone. It's the best image that I can, even in words, the inward curvature. It means that rather than going out to somebody, my love ends up coming back to being about me, myself, and I. I put myself before others. I put myself before my spouse. I put myself before my kids. I put myself before, I'm doing what feels good, what I think is best. I don't take, So the idea of inward curvature is a great sense of capturing sin. And you can see what happens when that stuff gets at the center of our lives. It really monkeys with us and messes everything up in our lives. And it can have ripple effects in the lives of others. That's one of the things that people sometimes forget, is that you can be both a perpetrator of sin, but also a victim of sin. Sin is something that can attack you because of somebody else and their inward curvature. Okay. So you can see there that the people, I don't know if you can see the number 1. You see there's a couple numbers in here. Number 1, that's trying to convey and capture Adam and Eve. So let's see if I can go back. How do I go back? Boom. Boom. No, let's go to this one. Okay, so if these two figures at the top kind of represent Adam and Eve, you notice how their hands are lifted up, kind of like praise, adoration, appreciation. And then if you go to the second one, their hands are on their hips. They're like, no way. It's all about me. That's what this is trying to capture. The idea in the sense that they are no longer focused on God, but far more focused on themselves. And so that's kind of representing Adam and Eve in the way in which they started making decisions. They stopped making decisions based on God and started making decisions based on themselves. And so you go up, you go directly up to the top of the image, and you have a number 2 there. And you see a picture of a man and a woman and a snake fracturing their relationship. And this means that in number 1, sin broke the relationship between God and humanity. In number 2, we see how sin, and specifically the snake, the story of how Adam and Eve ate forbidden fruit, fractured not only relationship with God, but relationship with one another. It's a great story because of what it entails, but oh man, it's so great because it's so accurate of how quickly we point the finger at one another. So, you know, the snake gets Eve to eat the apple, and then Eve goes and shares it with Adam, and then God says, Eve, Adam, what are you guys doing? Oh, dang, you're eating the fruit. I told you not to have that. That was set aside. You weren't supposed to get that. And Adam's first thing he does, what a jerk. But then again, so I do these things too, right? You do too. He thinks about himself. He's like, oh, it wasn't me. She made me do it. And points the finger at her. And she's like, what? You did not just throw me under the bus. And so there's a fracturing of relationship that happens not only with God, but between man and woman. And then on a larger scale, basically between people. I mean, that's what's happening there, is it's between people. If you follow down to number 3, we get a story about Adam and Eve's kids. Now that sin has been introduced into the narrative, you'll see 2 guys and a knife with some blood. That's pointing out Cain and Abel. That's pointing out how what started at number 1 with a fracturing between God and humanity, number 2, men and women, number 3, now sin, it's escalating. Like sin is getting worse according to the biblical narrative. It starts with God, then it's men and women, and now it's between brothers. It's between other people, even in a broader sense than even family. It's like 2 adult guys, and so it's getting bigger and it's growing in its scale. Number 4, you see at the bottom there, it's like a picture of an angel and a woman. This is a trippy story that no pastor ever preaches on because, y'all, we don't know what to do about this one. I'm just being honest. We don't have a clue what to do on this one. So this is a story of how, according to the scriptures, there's brokenness between like spiritual beings and humanity. Okay, there's a story in the Bible towards the beginning again. It happens right after Cain and Abel, shortly thereafter, where spiritual beings, what seems to be suggested in the text, I'll just say it, what seems to be suggested in the text is that spiritual beings have inappropriate intimacy with women. And so basically, this is, again, that ripple effect. What started as a brokenness between God and humanity has now grown to the extent where even spiritual forces are no longer obeying and respecting God and the boundaries that God placed on them for health and well-being. And so further fracturing happens. And finally, in number 5, in the right-hand side, you get there 2 people and like a mouth. That's the story of the Tower of Babel. Okay. And the story of the Tower of Babel is that the people thought they could be super cool and build a temple to the heavens. A lot of people see this and interpret this as pride, and they kind of wanted to be gods. They wanted to live where the gods lived, up in the clouds. And so they're like, dang, I'm going to build me a penthouse in the sky. If that's where the gods live, I'm going to be a god. And so they started building this big temple up to the sky, so to speak. And God looked at that and said, oh, you have got to be kidding me. No way. And so he confuses their language. He works a miracle of a kind that makes them unable to communicate with each other, and they scatter. And so that mouth represents the inability to understand one another in the scattering of languages. And then at the very top, you have that image of God again with a gavel, a judgment gavel in there, basically saying, okay, sin is getting out of hand here. And from the get-go, God will not tolerate, and God is not on board with sin. All right. There's a judgment that comes with sin, namely it's death. And yet, even as God does pronounce judgment, we're going to see grace. Here you go. Here's the most important thing of the night. Personal opinion. What the early part of the Bible is doing, it tells you a series of stories. This is the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. It tells you a series of stories with a rhythm and a pattern to them. The rhythm and the pattern are supposed to tell you about God. That's what these stories are trying to do. People try to make these things into the, like, I don't know how I describe this. I have to be careful. People try to leverage factual accuracy and that's not even a right way to say it. They argue so heatedly. They're missing the point. These stories are supposed to convey to you and tell you about the character and the heart of the living God. That's what they're for. That's what they're for. Whether they're symbolism or whether they actually physically happened, it doesn't matter, because they're not intended to. They're supposed to tell you about who God is and his character. And when you see the pattern, you begin to realize a lot more about the character and heart of God. So at the very top, you see there, in the beginning, everything was good, right? Everything was good. God created the heavens and the earth. He created the universe. He created everything of which we are situated in. And in the beginning, it was all good. He was in right relationship with us. We were in right relationship with him as humanity. We were in right relationship with each other and with creation itself. It was all good, man. It's all good. Everything was good. We got a rabbit hole question here. Do you believe these are literal, historical, metaphorical stories we learn from? Yep, thank you. That's what I was just kind of trying to get at, Joe. I mean, I think, here's what I think. So the question is, were these literal, historical, or are they just images and symbols trying to convey things? I would say it like this. For me, the point isn't proving it either way. The goal is not to say yes or no. The goal is faith. So for some people, if faith stems from seeing these as actual physical, like Adam, Eve, 2 people in the beginning, boom, that's it. That's how it happened, literal. It's kind of like God created the heavens and the earth in 7 24-hour periods. If that is what evokes and brings you closer in faith to the loving, gracious God, great, because the goal is faith. If, however, you have a broader, more symbolic understanding of a 24-hour period, if you're like, yeah, like, a day, the Bible also says a day is like a day in the courts of the Lord is like 1,000 years elsewhere. So, I maybe it wasn't talking about like 24-hour, 60-minute, 60-second periods, but it was just talking about a period of time. And God created the heavens and the earth in a series of over time. If that evokes faith in you and brings you closer to the living, gracious God, that's the goal. I am less concerned with proving this right or wrong. In fact, I find it discouraging when people try to put a stake in the ground and force people into that box. Oh, sorry, I did not mean like in a bad way, though, Joe. Seriously, um, I'm thinking I have a lot of baggage here, guys, because I've been witnessed the ways in which other pastors have tried to pigeonhole people, and I just have a real burden for that. For me, I never want to I never want people to lose faith on account of me saying, yes, they were actual literal experiences, or conversely, me saying, yes, they are symbolic, beautiful stories that paint a picture of God's character and love. So for me, the important thing is always going to be faith. So, and that's what these stories do. They help us when we step back and we see the circles. You guys see the patterns here. You get to know God better. So you can see that in the beginning, everything was good, but then we had sin enter the world. We had bad stuff creep in. Sometimes we call it the fall. Ironically, some people have referred to it as the rising because it was like the usurping of God's throne, the rising up of humanity to throw God off the throne. I don't know, however you want to call it. The bad stuff and problems enter the world, and we do that, right? I mean, come on. Don't we invite bad stuff into our lives? I don't know about you, but I do. Like, not intentionally. It's not like I walk around like saying, hey, sign me up for some bad stuff. Like, no, okay? What I'm talking about is through our own inward curvature in decision making and through the larger decision making of the world as a whole, I invite bad stuff into my life all the time, sadly. And I invite it, in fact, upon others. Sad but true statement. So sin enters the world because of me. Like, I'll own that. And there's judgment for that. Like, God ain't cool with that. That's not good. And God intended it for to be good. So he pronounces death as the first and foremost judgment. He places an angel with a flaming sword over the tree of life. It's like, whoa, trippy. Now, even as he does that, even as God pronounces judgment and say, Adam, Eve, not cool, guys. From now on, you're going to die. Humanity will die. What's amazing about that is that there's still a measure of providence and grace that comes in conjunction with that. So the illustrator here makes the case that right after God makes the pronouncement of judgment saying you're going to die, you should not have eaten that fruit, God then goes and clothes them. It's something that we read past quickly in the scriptures, but it's shortly after he pronounces death, humanity, Adam and Eve, are naked and ashamed, the Bible says, and God goes out of his way to clothe them so they will no longer bear shame. And so you see God's grace coming even after and alongside the judgment. And then you see that same thing happen again with Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel, there's a murder. The brothers fight. Cain kills Abel. Abel is dead, and his blood is soaking up the dust of the earth. God looks at Cain and says, Cain, not cool, man. You can't continue to be in my presence and the presence of your family and the people. And so off you go. And yet, even as you go, Cain, I'm going to, the mark of Cain. You guys ever heard that? You've heard it in like pop culture or something, the mark of Cain. I'm going to put a mark on you, and that mark will keep you safe. And so, even as you go out into the wilderness, you go out marked with me, my marking, and you will be preserved and kept safe. Sin, spiritual boundaries and cosmic confusion, spiritual boundaries being taken advantage of and just not being good, inviting further brokenness into the world and into the cosmos. Not cool. Judgment, flood. I mean, things get really bad by the time you get to Noah. The Bible says by the time you get to Noah, things have escalated to such a degree that there's no one on earth righteous and good except for Noah and Noah's family. So notice also how there's like the upside down triangle. As sin and brokenness increase exponentially so. As they become more and more prevalent, powerful, and increase, goodness and righteousness decreases down all the way to Abraham. Oh, you guys can't see. Stop. Hide. Go away. There we go. I should have done that in the beginning. Oh, my goodness. All right, so there you go. That as sin increases exponentially and things get worse and worse and worse, fewer and fewer people adhere to God's goodness and recognize God for being good until you finally get to the story of Abraham. Okay. And so this is, in my opinion, this is such a good graphic, guys, because it shows us that despite the sin that we introduce into our lives and into the world, God does make judgment, but there's always grace. There's always grace that comes, even after the judgment, right? And so, even though there's a flood, God preserves Noah's family. The Tower of Babel, not cool. He disperses everybody and mixes up the languages. He scatters the people, and yet he attaches himself in a profound way to one specific person. He scatters the multitudes, but he identifies one person and says, "Okay, I can't seem to do this with everybody. Maybe I can do it with just one." And so he focuses his promise and his love and his rescue plan down into one person. He started with kind of trying to save and help and do everything for everyone, and yet he narrows it down as sin increases to one person. Tom, was the mark of shame? What was the mark of shame? Is that what you mean? What was the mark of shame? The mark of Cain? Cain kills Abel, and then God marks him. I'd have to look up the Hebrew word for more on that, but it's this idea that wherever he goes, he bears this mark, and that he'll be protected because of it. Like other people will come up to him and be, "Oh, you that guy." Like other nomadic tribes will come up and be like, "Oh, that's Cain. You don't mess with him, man. He's got a beef with God." And that in doing so, then he's actually ironically protected, right? And so the mark distinguishes him. So it's actually, yeah, okay. So that's what you're talking about. Yeah. So that's what's interesting about it, is that it's this mark of shame and this mark of saying you are a murderer, and yet ironically, it is the very thing that actually protects him from death himself. So in that way, it's gracious and generous. He can live out his life. So there you go, guys. I mean, that's just such a good image, because it shows us, and this also tells you so much about who God is, right? That no matter how many times and how much sin creeps its way into your life, yeah, there's going to be judgment. I won't deny that. I won't sugarcoat that. But there's always grace, even after the judgment and the pain. There's unexpected gifts and love and kindness that will come. And I can tell you story after story of people who have said, "Yep, I made some big, dumb decisions in my life. And yet, man, God has been so good to me and so kind and so gracious and so loving and so patient with me." And just like you have told those stories about your lives, the Bible is trying to tell you about that for humanity. You become the archetype who represents these stories that the Bible is trying to convey in Genesis. So it's actually pretty profound. We're doing some good theology, guys. We can talk briefly about Abraham, and then we'll wrap up. Oh man, look and see how much other good stuff. Oh, I gotta go fast if I can finish all this. All right. So God goes to this one specific guy. His name is Abraham. You guys know Abraham, Father Abraham had many sons. I'm singing a lot tonight. Do you guys know that one? Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all, what is it? Praise the Lord. Sarah was watching earlier. You know kids' songs, Sarah. I'm sorry. I should pay attention more to the kids' songs. God goes to Abraham. Abraham is a single individual who's living in ancient he wasn't actually living in, he was living in ancient Iraq, basically. He's living in ancient Iraq and in the city of Ur. It's actually his dad. He's chilling with his dad, and his dad, God comes to his dad, ironically, and says, "Hey, I have plans for the future." And the dad's like, "Ah, all right, well, we'll go a little way." So the dad packs up the family and starts heading towards the promised land, but then settles in Ur. He gets he goes like down the street and is like, "Ah, forget it." And so God, you got to picture God just being like, "What is wrong with humanity? These people." And so God goes to his son Abraham. Abraham, I'm choosing you. Abraham, you are the one. You're gonna do this. I got faith in you, buddy. And Abraham's like, "Okay, you're my God now. If you got faith in me, I got faith in you. Let's do it together." And so Abraham packs up the fam and heads out west. Go west, young Abraham. Go west. And so Abraham does. He heads out west, heading out towards the Mediterranean Sea. Travels west to the sea, and God makes a promise to him in doing so. He makes a promise. Abraham has to leave behind other gods, traditions, and cultures. That's why you see those small idols there. The ancient world was just riddled with lots and lots of idols. You can see there some very well endowed idols. Those are fertility gods, and that was kind of the big thing, basically. Fertility gods. Everybody wanted fertility gods to bless their family with lots of children, and they wanted them to bless. The fertility goddess was associated always with a good crop, farming. And so if you were a nomadic tribesman, you wanted a good grass to grow so you could feed your flock. And if you were a farmer, you wanted rains to come just like the rest so that you could have a good yield for your crop. So everybody worshipped all these fertility gods and goddesses. They take up a big role in the next week or the week after. They take up a big role because some tensions come very quickly with God's people and these fertility goddesses and gods. So Abraham says, "All right, fine, you're my God. I reject these other ones. You're it, God." And he makes a promise to him. And God is the one who actually initiates the promise to Abraham. God says, "Abraham, I promise to give you land." So if you look at the bottom there, you see the scroll. God promises Abraham land. He says, "I'm going to make you a land owner." And that's a small picture of ancient Israel. That's actually the Dead Sea at the bottom and the River Jordan. And then the star of David is Jerusalem. So God promises him land. He promises him a family. Says, "Abraham, I'm going to make you a daddy. You're going to be a baby daddy." And this is exciting for Abraham because Abraham is well on in his years. He is a aged individual. And he's like, "Yeah, really? Cool. We were always hoping for that." But it just never happened, right? And so God says, "Nope, it's going to happen." And then finally, he gets land, he gets a family, and then he says, "Abraham, you are going to be the one, and through you and your family, you will be a blessing to the nations." That's trying to be captured by that cup overflowing there. That Abraham and his legacy becomes that which blesses the entire world. And for us as Christians, this is so profound and so big because we trace back this promise, we can trace all the way through to the person of Jesus, that Jesus becomes that blessing to the rest of the world. Right? Does that make sense? Jesus becomes that blessing to the rest of the world, fulfilling God's promise to Abraham. So, Abraham's story is a really fascinating one. He ends up traveling all the way there. He has all sorts of stuff happen. Ooh, we can talk about that next week. This is good stuff too. We'll wait till next week to pick that up. Abraham does travel all the way out there to Israel. It's a fascinating story. He does have a son. His name is Isaac. He has two sons. But only one that is a legitimate son from his married wife. His wife is getting on in years, Sarah as well, and she's like, "Psh, I ain't having a kid. You crazy, man? That ain't happening. Not with these bones." And so she doesn't take it seriously, and she says, "Well, I'll tell you what, Abraham. Why don't you sleep with my maidservant, Hagar?" And Abraham is like, "Let me get this straight. my wife just asked me to sleep with her younger, better looking. Oh, I shouldn't say that. That's adding to the text. But it's kind of like Abraham here is a guy's guy. Who's like, okay, honey, if you say so. I mean, come on, Abraham, dude. I don't know. Anyways, he sleeps with Hagar and has a kid with Hagar. And then God's like, no, that is not what I said, Abraham. Abraham, I told you that you and your wife Sarah would have a kid. So don't try to take matters into your own hand. I got this. I've got this. I said I would do it, and I'll do it. And lo and behold, Sarah does bear a child, Isaac. So another lesson to be had there. Don't take matters into your own hand. When God says he's going to do it, just trust him for it. He's good for it. Don't try to take matters in your own hand. The smoking pot there in the center with like the incense burning is because God makes the promise to Abraham and then actually reiterates the promise. He comes to Abraham twice and reiterates the promise. And the second time, he does what we now know to be an ancient covenant practice with nomadic people. It sounds really gross, guys, but you take some animals. Abraham is a nomadic tribesman, and so he lives and dies by his animals. Animals are your economy. Animals are your food. Animals are everything. Okay, you rely upon and depend upon animals. That's why animal sacrifice was so big and so critical, and played such a role in the ancient world. Everybody depended upon animals for everything. And so when you kill an animal, it's a big deal when you sacrifice an animal. It's a huge deal. And so Abraham takes some animals, he cuts them in half. True. That's what they did. That was the thing back in the day. When you wanted to make an unwavering, total, absolute commitment, you would take some animals and then you would cut them in half, and then you would hold hands and you would walk the middle between the halves of the animals. Ugh. I know it sounds gross, but that was what they did in the ancient world. And the idea was, if I break this promise, may I end up like these animals, torn in two, blood soaking the earth. May I end up being like them if I don't follow through on my promise. And what's fascinating here is Abraham falls asleep. Abraham takes these animals, he cuts them in half, and then the guy takes a snooze. And an image of a pot with incense, a smoking experience, an image of God. Okay, God walks in between the animals. The idea here is God made a binding, certifiably stamped and notarized, according to ancient traditions, promise to Abraham. Abraham, I'm going to give you land, I'm going to give you a family, and you're going to be a blessing to the nations. And so that is what God does, and why Abraham forms the foundation for everything that comes next in the biblical narrative. So far for what we've covered, then a recap would be, in the beginning, what you need to remember is the Bible is trying to convey sense of who God is and our relationship to him and our relationship to each other. And by looking at these stories, we get a better sense of God's heart and character. And in doing so, we can have a better understanding, a better faith in relation to him. Okay. So that's why we're taking this really high level look and seeing these themes in these stories. So let me switch back over. Let me finish with that. Stop sharing. Is that going to work? Nice. Cool. Hey, guys, thanks for joining me. It's already 8:38, so I'm going to wrap up for the night. Thanks for joining me. We're going to pick up next week. Just a reminder for you, if you want, you can go to crossways.org and you can get the material. You can get get the student guide. If you want extra homework, if you're like, I love this, I want more of this. Oh, this is so good. This is what you want. This is what you want. Okay. Crossways.org. And you can find these workbooks that will supplement what I'm doing with this teaching stuff. They'll take you into the scriptures in much more detail. They'll actually take you into the stories, and it does include actually the graphics. Okay, so like you'll work your way through the images with different stuff. So if you like to highlight, you like to read, and you really want to get down into the scripture itself, you can do this, because we're kind of doing really high level stuff, and I'm talking about just stories as a whole. So crossways.org, go for the student edition, and we are doing C through the scriptures. We're going to do this for another 7 or 8 weeks. Take us into the summer. Thanks for joining me tonight. If you want, you can check us out and hang out with me again on Thursday morning. If everything is fixed and working, guess what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. Thanks for bearing with me tonight. Hopefully you guys were able to, obviously you guys were able to find this. So thanks for joining tonight. Let's see if there's any other, do you guys have any other last questions before we pop out? Nope, I don't see anything new. Coolio. Thanks for joining me, guys. Thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for being a part of it. Thanks for being part of the conversation and doing the C3 stream with me. Kind of having fun. We're making the most of this whole quarantine thing. And yeah, I think this might even be something we keep doing in the future because it's a blast and hopefully it's a joy for you as well. So thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you and see you on Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m. for morning meditation. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your night. Bye.